Today, I'm trying a new material. Using this previously drawn nature study of dandelions, I'm going to experiment with jelly gouache from Artist Loft, a very affordable and easily accessible gouache brand. Now, gouache as a product has been around for like 12 centuries. Jelly gouache, though, made more popular around 2018. This is a more water-soluble friendly version of gouache, which, if I were to describe it as a product, is kind of like a mix between acrylic and watercolor. The traditional gouache is not water-soluble after it is dry. Jelly gouache can be reconstituted once dried, and it comes in these pudding packs, and I mean that quite literally. They're little pudding packs of paint with a foil lid, foil and plastic. That includes the pudding stuck to the lid stage of opening a pudding. I'm going to set all of those aside on this tray. I'm also going to put the paints that I choose to open today for this dandelion product back into this tray according to the color guide that comes with the set. They're not going to stay this way forever. I hate it when paints are not organized according to color families, so I will eventually reorganize this whole thing. Today I'm only opening the colors I'm going to use to paint my dandelions, which is a yellow, a purple shadow tone, 2 shades of green, and I am also going to open this white. I'm also going to try to show you, it's not going to show well in the bright light here first, so I'll have to turn this off, but the paints will have a little bit of a binder kind of separation if they've sat for a long time. You don't need to worry about it. You can just mix it back in. It does not mean the paints have gone bad. Totally fine. I am going to start, and because I hate waste, I am going to use the product that's just stuck to these lids, particularly since I know it's not going to take a large volume of paint to do this project. But here is a dry swab and then a water saturated swab, where you can kind of see how these paints react really well to thinning with water and do have that acrylic and watercolor kind of crossover vibe. I am using this purple in the areas where I'm going to have the deepest shadow on the leaf and stalks of my dandelion picture. I know this looks very pretty pastel and may not seem like an obvious choice for a shadow tone, but trust me, this will neutralize out with all of the greens that are going to go on top of these. Trust the process. Now that my shadow layer is done, I'm going to use the watercolor light to dark methodology for applying the paint, and even with this first very light layer, you can see how that purple neutralizes out, has sort of a rusty shadow sort of tonality to it. And also say that these paints dry more like watercolors, even though I'm using a lot of them very mildly diluted and primarily just straight from my palette. They dry pretty quickly. They don't stay tacky and sticky like acrylic does for long periods of time. The yellow I was very pleased with. It is thin enough that it's still transparent. I can see the lines of my pencil marks, but the color saturation is really good. I don't feel like I have to paint a ton of layers in order to get a really good dandelion yellow out of it. Now with this darker green, you can see here I've put too much saturation, so I've wet my brush. It thins out really well. I will say that even thinned out, this paint holds brush strokes a lot more like acrylic, so I wouldn't use it for like a big smooth background wash that you can get with watercolor, but it is allowing that yellow spring green to show through the layer the way that watercolor would allow light to allow those translucent layers to play with each other. So I am really loving that. The difference between jelly gouache and acrylic gouache is really in the binder. Jelly gouache uses gum arabic as a binder, which is water soluble after drying, so it's rewettable. Acrylic gouache uses an acrylic polymer binder, which is water resistant once dry. So that's the main difference in the formulas of these paints. Presentation, I am super duper loving the little pudding cup. There's something so fun about that. Most artists are all 9 years old on the inside. I certainly fall into that category, so there we have it. Pudding cups are fun, especially when they're full of paint. Now I'm going to paint a background behind these dandelion pieces because I want to see how this white gouache reacts on top of another color. And in order to paint a seeded dandelion, you have to have a background color, at least when you're using white paper. So that's what I'm doing here. Another really good look at how the paintbrush strokes are captured in the gouache even when it's quite watered down. So again, unless that texture is something you are purposefully looking for, not a super great paint for thin, even background washes for paintings. But again, the color saturation, it's vibrant and beautiful, all with one layer, despite the fact that I am using it pretty watered down here. And by watered down, I'm not mixing a pre-mixed amount of paint. I'm just putting it on my brush, dipping that brush in water, and letting whatever happens happen on the paper. Now I am not letting this sit and drawing first. I'm just dipping right into the white paint and painting across damp gouache underneath. Now if this were watercolor, one, the white would never be this vibrant. It doesn't have the density to do that. And it would also spread out and dilute on damp paper, but gouache does not do that. This is that acrylic property showing through. So I'm really loving that. As an impatient person, I love any scenario and art product that lets me just get on with the fun stuff. So really loving how this white is handling on top of the damp blue background color. And there we have it, a jelly gouache painted dandelion in my nature journal.